Hey there gardeners, Chris from Garden Setting here today. I wanted to talk about the cheapest garden bed you can buy, maybe in Australia, especially when we're talking about size, and that is this rectangular raised garden bed from Bunnings. And basically, it's almost a no branded product. It's 300 tall, which is 30 centimeters or a bit over a foot. It's 900 wide, so a bit over 3 foot, and 1200 long, which again probably 4 foot. I'm going very, very rough there. I have no idea with imperial stuff. And you can buy this color, which is the pale one, which I'll show you in a second, for I think it's $25 at the moment. The dark colored bed is much more expensive. It's maybe closer to $40. But this one from your local Bunnings is probably the best value garden bed if you just want a cheap, simple, easy to assemble garden bed. You're not too concerned about how long it's going to last because this one does have plastic corners. It's a very cheaply made garden bed, but for a short-term project, I think it'd be ideal. And while those corners are a real weak point, and there's kind of no getting around that, I think you could probably replace them. Now, I've had a number of these, and I'll give you a look at basically where we've implemented them in a second, but I'll show you what's in the box, because the first time I bought this, I opened the box and I kind of went, oh, they've forgotten half of the package, which was not the case at all. So we've got our four corners. As you can see here, these are plastic. They have a little bit of reinforcement in them. This is the cheapest garden bed I have ever seen. And the price reflects that. The Audi currently, if you're in Australia, has actually a very similar garden bed that looks like it's all metal for a little bit more. So if you're looking for something a little bit better, you could try for the Audi option. However, they always have stuff in very limited options, and when it gets sold, it's gone. And so it's a bit harder to recommend that because you really have to get your timing right. So as far as what's in the box, you've got two big pieces like this. This is a very, very light piece of I don't know what you want to call it, like tin sheeting. It does have folded edges, but it's significantly lighter than the more expensive beds. If you're familiar with birdies and you want to compare the quality between the two, there is no comparison because this is very, very cheap in comparison. But something somewhat equivalent to this, so this is $25. The Birdie's equivalent is about $100. And obviously we're talking Australian dollars here. So the Australian dollar isn't worth a lot. So if you're in another country, that might seem shocking, but it is what it is. So yeah, and that's the other side. So you've got your two long sides, you've got your two short sides, 3 bolt points for each join. So 6 bolts per corner, and it's a 5-minute assembly job, which I'm going to show you in a second. But we might go have a look at my garden beds, which I've used with these. So I put some of these in, I put a row of them in, I put 4 in. They've been established for a while, and I've had some quite good results. And obviously, the reality of the situation is that the garden bed just has to do its job and hold the soil in place. And it's only been a couple of months where I think these plastic corners are likely to fail after a number of years because plastic gets brittle. And when that happens, you will need to look for something to replace the corners, which I think you could probably do if you squeeze the bed down a little bit. You could just bolt the corners together or screw them into a piece of timber. But in the short term, I should get a year or two, I reckon, out of these gardens, and that's pretty good. So I do apologise about the cicadas. They are very, very loud at this time of year. This is the zucchini garden, which I'm going to have to get on top of it because there's obviously a pest really eating into the leaves here. But this has gone absolutely gangbusters in one of these little rectangular beds. bed cost almost nothing at all. Obviously, filling the bed with soil is a far more expensive proposition, but chucking a couple of zucchinis in here, it's gone gangbusters. We're already getting a crop of zucchinis to add to our food and our cooking, which is really good. I do have a little bit of sorrel in the corner, some chives. The parsley hasn't really done all that well. I think it's not getting enough sun in the corner there. But I think this kind of demonstrates what you can achieve with a little garden bed like this, where you're not paying a lot of money for the garden bed. This garden bed here, we got some eggplant, we got some celery. This has not gone well because it's not got great soil. This one over in the middle is much more of a success story. We've got radishes, we've got, I think, chilies. We've got some, what is that? Cucumber over the back there and some beans over here. And I'm not sure if those are weeds in the middle, hard to tell. And then this garden bed here on the end is probably the best kind of way of seeing the garden bed itself. And because it's fairly exposed, I didn't overfill it with soil, which I probably should have added more soil because they're not the tallest or deepest of beds. But everything growing quite well in there. So, all right, not bad at all. No regrets in buying these beds and setting up my first garden row with them. And the cost of those 4 beds was, just a bit over $100 because they were a little bit more expensive when I first bought them. And it's given me a lot of garden bed space for cheap. Okay, so also included in the instructions, or included is the instructions, which is very, very simple, like really simple. And obviously a big bag of nuts and bolts that we're going to use to put all this together. I recommend for the bolts a basically electric screwdriver of some type because it's going to make the job much, much easier. I hand thread them all on and then I tighten them all up with that and it just makes it quicker. I have a bad feeling that I can't use this little generic Birdie's socket or wrench. So I'm going to have to go get probably a 10 mil for this, maybe an 8 mil. I'll be right back. Okay, so a 10 mil or one of these adjustable wrenches. That's just an IKEA one that I've got for the old bolt, or nut, I should say. And I would certainly recommend something like this. It doesn't need to be this brand, obviously, but it'll just make the job quicker. If you're doing this on grass, you're going to have less of an issue. On a sealed surface, I'd just be careful not to scratch up your panels. And really all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the short piece and I'm going to put the 2 corners on it. It's worth noting that the corners, they have a closed end and an open end, and they only align with these panels in one way. So you can't really do it wrong unless you force it in a way which is not going to work too well at all. So I'm going to grab one of my bolts, chuck it through. Obviously this is all by hand. I'm not using the power tools at this early stage. Get it hand tight and I'll put a couple in and then give you a look. As you can see, bolts on the outside, nuts on the inside. The way that it fits in to that corner, as you can see, that's the closed end there. That is the open end here. That's going to be towards the ground. That's going to be the top of the garden bed. And yeah. So I'm going to put the rest of this together and we'll speed things up so that I'm not wasting your time. All right, tighten everything up. Okay, hopefully you can see me here. I've got our fully assembled, basically no brand garden bed, 1200 long, so 1.2 meters or like 4-ish feet-ish, maybe almost 5 feet, 900 millimeters along the short end, so 3-ish feet, very, very cheap plastic corners, very, very cheap panels. The rigidity of these panels is very, very poor, and you certainly would not want to be leaning against this garden bed. Once it's got soil in it, it'll be okay, but the reality is this is a super cheap garden bed. As far as my thoughts on it, obviously I've got the 4 garden beds that I've used quite successfully in the short term. For the garden beds that I'm planting, basically anything that is a long-term grower, so anything that's going to last more than a season, I'm going for the garden beds, because I can see these beds failing at some point in the future when the corners get brittle, because plastic in the sun, it just does happen. And because it's a very, very light build, it's going to happen much more quickly. I've used some garden beds in the past which had kind of the clip in corners that were a much heavier duty corner. Those lasted for a number of years, no issue, but they were so much heavier duty than these. And so as a result, this garden bed is kind of one of those things that I'd recommend if you want something that's not a long-term solution. If you want to experiment, you want to save a bit of money, and you don't need the best of the best. If you're thinking about a garden bed that you want to be there for 10 years, I probably wouldn't spend the 25 bucks on one of these. I'd go up to a birdie's garden bed and spend, say, 100 to get a similar size, and you'll get a bed that's going to last much longer. But that doesn't mean that there's not a place for this kind of product. It could be a little bit better. I would probably prefer if they could keep the price the same, metal corners, just that I knew it would be probably just lasting a bit longer, a little bit stronger. But yeah, for 25 bucks, I can't really complain. So this is going to be added in as a little bit of a flower bed for my wife to try putting basically flower seeds in. And I'm thinking I might actually grab a couple more of these and put them in as an extra row in my vegetable garden. And the idea behind that is just having some garden beds I can experiment in, that if I don't like what's happening, if I don't like the crops, or if the crops fail or whatever, I can really just basically go, well, you know what, I'll just move the soil somewhere else, I'll pull them out. I might use the sheeting for something, but I could throw one of these away pretty happily after a year or two and feel like I've got my money's worth. And it's probably not something that I'd be relocating around the garden to use somewhere else. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. The one weakness I'd say with this is it's only 300 deep, where some of the alternatives, which are more expensive, tend to be 370 deep. And that extra bit of depth might be useful for you. You never know. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's all right. I don't regret buying it. And certainly, if I got to pay 4 times more, that makes it a very hard decision to buy the other garden beds. I got to be really planning that out, be really sure of myself. Whereas with one of these, I feel like it's a bit more of a throwaway purchase. If you are tight on cash, I would actually say I probably wouldn't recommend this. Basically, to me, a 25 product like this that you can afford to throw away is a product you can afford to throw away. If you cannot afford to waste $25, you should buy a better bed that is going to last a long, long while. And I certainly don't see any value in spending, I think it's like $15 more for the garden bed, which is the blacked out color. It's like a dark granite or something like that. I wouldn't pay $40 for one of these beds. When I first bought them, I think they were 30 or 32 or maybe 28. And since then, they've dropped down to like 24 or 25. So, which is, yeah, pretty cool. And they're just in the garden bed section of your local Bunnings. So check them out. There's like a whole heap of choices there. This is probably the cheapest from what I've seen, and it might just be good for you.